we're going to discuss today is actually, I think you're going to find that it's new. And, in this day and age, it's not every day that you actually come across something that's new, right? I mean, but I think you're going to find that we're going to dive into a body of ideas, both in terms of at the conceptual level, but at the practical level as well. I think you're going to discover that, oh, wow, isn't quite anything I've heard before. And hopefully you'll be able to take away from this and make some applications immediately. So I've been in this space, in leadership space, working with organizations and leaders across the world for 30 years, almost exactly 30 years now. And one of the surprises over the years for me was to discover that one of the biggest drivers of success, both organizational and personal, by the way, is something that's rarely, if ever, measured. In fact, it's hardly, and because it's not being measured, it's not being addressed, it's not being improved. And because that's the case, and I know there are all kinds of metrics across organizations, of course, there are all kinds of things that go into a successful venture. But I'm going to introduce you to something that is at least competing for head of the class for what's driving results at any level. And no one's actually doing anything about it. We're rarely even thinking about it. And as a result of that, it has tons of implications. Among them, it means we have a huge blind spot around risk. Because if we don't know sort of a potential benefit set from something, we're not even thinking about it, then we don't know the risks for running afoul of it either. We're just not making those calculations at all. So in order to dive into this, what is this thing that leaders and organizations actually aren't paying attention to, at least not in a disciplined way, that's having a huge impact on their work one way or another? I want to introduce that to you here in this a few slides. I'm gonna call this a new paradigm. And in fact, Brad mentioned my newest book, You and We. Part one of the book is called A New Paradigm. I'm going to introduce you to some new ideas here. And this is a bit of kind of, I'm going to attempt to turn the dial a little bit. So, there's the way we see things normally. I'm going to turn that dial 90 degrees, and hopefully some new things are going to come into sight when we do that. So I want to start by in a way that people just love starting this way. Doesn't everyone want to do math? Here's a little bit of math. So just a question for all of you here. Who recognizes this formula? It's actually a really famous formula, a very important formula in history. Does anyone recognize this formula?
So Luke suggests formula for gravity.
Yeah. This is Newton's universal law of gravity, the formula for that. And so here I'm going to ask two questions about that. And thanks, Luke. You're right on top of that. So I want you to just think for yourself. There's maybe not a way to get feedback on this, but if I were in person with you, I'd ask two questions right now, and I'd see your responses. The first question would be, raise your hand if you've thought about gravity today. And my prediction is no one will have raised their hand if we were in a room together. Maybe one, but for the most part, no one's been thinking about gravity today. But then I'll ask the second question, which is, raise your hand if gravity has affected your life today. And everyone's hand goes up, right? So gravity is just part of a reality that we live in. It's such woven into our reality. We're not even thinking about it, even though it has this massive impact on us moment to moment. It's not top of mind. And what I want to present to you today is that there's actually another law that operates like gravity. It's actually a set of laws around one issue that I'm going to introduce you to you here. That just like gravity, we are living in the middle of these laws. We are not thinking about them at all, but they're having a huge impact on us moment to moment. And in order to introduce that, I want to give you a recommendation. If you want a mind-blowing read, this is a book that would do that for you. I'm a closet quantum physicist. Now I'm not a quantum physicist. I'm a very amateur sort of guy who geeks out on quantum theory because it just is so fascinating. And I want to give, and this is currently my favorite author in the space. His name is Carlo Rovelli. He himself is a world-class physicist, and his work is really something. So I want to give you a few ideas from this book and a couple of others of his books to introduce this law that we're not thinking about that is affecting us moment to moment. So Rovelli says that the central development in science over the last century is a relational understanding of reality. Okay? I'm going to build on that so we get a feel for what that means. Nothing exists except in relation. Nothing stands on its own. Everything depends on something else. It is only in interactions that nature draws the world. Okay. Now, so what does all that mean? Well, I want to build out that understanding of what that means by introducing you to what I call the 4 laws of relation. And I'm going to do that to kind of wrestle hard concepts, things that can be tricky. It helps me to think by analogy. So I'm going to give you 4 analogies, and we'll tease out what I call the 4 laws of relation from each of these 4 analogies. So the first analogy is actually a game of tic-tac-toe. Now, I want to, Brad, since I see you and I are going to play a game of tic-tac-toe right now, my friend. Good enough?
Again.
I've got the grid. Can you see my grid?
I can, mate. Yeah.
Okay. So I've gone first, which, by the way, is the first law. The first rule of tic-tac-toe is go first. But since I've got the sheet of paper, I'll go first. So where's your move, Brad?
I'll go to the center.
Center. Okay. So I'll give you the center, and then I'll show my next move. I'm going to go bottom right corner. What do you do next?
I'll go to the center right.
You're going to go over here?
Yep.
Okay. So you'll go center right, and then I'll go here. Where do you go here?
I'll go to the bottom left.
Bottom left. Okay. So we have here, and then you're going to block me here. You'll go up right here. I'll block you here. We've got a cat's game. Okay. So very good. So rule 1 of tic-tac-toe is go first. Rule 2, if you go first, usually corner is the best first move. But if the other person goes corner, you have to, like Brad, go middle or you lose the game. If the other person starts middle, you have to go corner or you lose the game. There's another third rule. It's not quite as important. We'll leave it at that. But here's what the game itself is a simple game, right? But what's important about it for my purposes with you today is that if you think about the moves that both I and Brad made in the game, none of those moves rested on themselves. None of them were in isolation. All of them were in relation. Were they not, Brad? You were in response to me. I'm in response to you. No move is intelligible except in relation. Now, that's true of every game, but it's actually true of life. There is nothing in life that's outside of relation. And in fact, that's so the truth that, Brad, I'm going to do one other little sort of activity with you here to illustrate this. And so, Brad, we'll all learn this with this interaction with Brad. So we're all looking at Brad right now, okay? So now there's a temptation. It's not even a temptation. It's just there's an assumption. There's a presumption we come into this with that we're looking at Brad. There's Brad over there. This is about Brad over there. But in fact, that's actually not what's happening when I'm looking at Brad or when I'm looking at anyone or at anything for that matter. Because what I miss, what I'm not thinking about is I'm the one who's looking at Brad. See, I'm tempted to think there's Brad over there. No, actually, but I'm the one who's looking at Brad over there. So I'm in the seeing, okay? Which is to say that none of us is seeing Brad. We're each seeing our own relational intersection with Brad because we are each doing the seeing, okay? So because that's the case, this is the first law of relation, that all we see is relation. Everything we see is relation. Now, just think of organizational space for a moment. We normally aren't operating this way at all. I mean, we think we're looking at the sales department over there, or there's the operations department over here, or here's the leadership team over there. But in fact, we ourselves are the one doing the seeing. They're all in response to us, in response to us, just like we're in response to them. Everything we're seeing in an organization and experiencing is relation. No one's experiencing separateness or sort of separation, okay, or independence for that matter. So that's the first law of relation. The second law I'll introduce with a really famous painting that some of you might have seen before. It's one of the greats in history. This is Seurat's painting, Georges Seurat's painting. And what's famous about this is it created kind of a new category of painting, and it's called pointillism. Because if you were to go, this is an enormous painting, by the way. It's about 9 foot by 7 foot, and it sits in Chicago, the original. So if you were to approach this closely, what you would notice is this painting is constructed of hundreds of thousands of tiny dots. They're not brush strokes. There's no like mixed paints here. Everything is just the distinct basic colors. All the colors you're seeing are just these different little dots with different colors in relation to each other that in your eye you're seeing as a particular color. And as you back away, we see all of these figures. It looks like it's a painting. And that's true, it's a painting. But here's the point of pointillism. It's a painting that's constructed all these little tiny things in relation. Now, that's true, of course, of any painting, because brushstrokes, they're separate brushstrokes that all come together into a painting. But pointillism makes that even all the more clear. But this isn't only true of this painting or any other painting. It's true of everything in existence. Everything you can think of, everything you can see, anything you can touch, everything is constructed of smaller things in relation. That's true of our human bodies. That's true of our communications. That's true of an organization. You can think of this painting as sort of an analogy for an organization. An organization is a thing that's made up of a whole bunch of smaller bits in relation, right? Everything is made up of other things, smaller things in relation. That's the second law. Everything is built by relation. Now, the third law, I use a metaphor of at least in physics, the most famous experiment ever conducted. The results are so astonishing that this experiment's been run and rerun thousands, probably tens of thousands of times, because people can't actually believe that it's true, but it's verified over and over and over. The experiment is called the double slit experiment, and it's about trying to figure out what the nature of light is. And namely, is it a particle or a wave? Well, it turns out that whether a light is a particle or a wave depends on how we interact with light. And specifically, here's the real freaky thing with regard to light and this experiment. It turns out if you watch light, it's a particle. If you don't, it's a wave. So it's like light is in response, in reaction. We're in relation with it. Now, that seems a little weird, but let me put it in human terms. We'll run a little kind of experiment on each of us here. So I'm going to invite something of everyone here on this call. So I want you to think of 2 relationships in your life. I want you to think of a really good one, maybe your best relationship. And then I want you to think of a tough one, maybe one of your worst. Okay. And so I want you to write down the name of like the person, maybe one of your best relationships in your life, write their name down somewhere, the person you're in that relationship with. And then a really hard relationship, write that name down as well. So you have 2 names. And then for each of those names, I want you to think of 3 words that describe you in that relationship. So in your really your great relationship, 3 words that really capture you, who you are when you're in that relationship. And same thing for your really hard relationship, 3 words that capture who you are in that relationship. So I'm going to give you about this. I'm going to go fast. I'm going to give you 20 seconds on this. Just bang out 3 words for each of those. Okay. And then I've got a question for you. Okay. Now, so here's my question. You look at your two lists of words. You should have two lists of 3 words. And my question for you is, are they the same words in each list? Are they the same lists? Or are they actually 2 very different lists? And if you're like every other group I've ever been with, basically everyone says, no, they're entirely different words, which raises the question, well, then which person are you? Are you the person you describe in the good relationship or the tough one? And of course, the answer is we're both, because we are who we are in interaction with others, just like light is, right? We interact with others in the same way we interact with light. This is basically the light experiment on you. You have a possibility of showing up in any number of ways, but the physicists would call that a wave function of possibility. But in the moment of intersection, you collapse. That wave function of possibility collapses into a certain reality, and we show up in relation in different ways. My wife and I joke that, for example, my name's Jim, so there's a version of me that we call Airport Jim. So I'm a different person at the airport than I am outside the airport. You can all think about how you might show up differently in different relational contexts as well. So the third law of relation is this, that how we interact is who we are, which brings us to the fourth law of relation. And I want to introduce this with another metaphor, this one, water. So here's a depiction of a water molecule, 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom, together bond together, and they form water. Well, here's the thing. The world needs both oxygen and hydrogen. That's fine. And if all they do is hang out themselves or together, we just continue with hydrogen and oxygen. But if you get 2 hydrogens coming over and they compress against an oxygen atom and then hold together in their difference, out of the tension of the differences compressed together, nevertheless holding to each other, emerges something entirely new that we'd call water. And this, turns out, is the pattern of progress for everything in the universe. A really fascinating body of work by a paleontologist who studied evolution named Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a French scientist. He shows how everything progressed from the very small bits of the elements up to life and more complex forms of life to us and human thought. It all progresses through this 3-part process we see in water. That is, differences need to compress against each other. If differences stay separate, they just stay different. They just stay what they are. There's no growth out of sameness. You have differences come together and press. If they hold on to each other in their difference, out of that's converging. Then the third step is emerging. You have the emergence of the new. So compress, converge, emerge. And the law of relation is we progress by uniting, specifically by uniting our differences. So now, with that as a foundation, let's think about this for a moment. Here's an org chart. So let's think relationally about this org chart. I'm going to open up the chat here. I want to see what you say. What would you say is the most important part of this org chart when we're thinking relationally? Go ahead and type in the chat. What would be the most important part? Okay, Luke. Yeah, the connections. Yeah. Yeah. So Luke goes right to the core of it here. Let's think about this for a moment. Yeah, I would agree with Luke that the most important part of this org chart is the between. That is the space between all of us, because that's where we're actually mixing and merging. Nothing's produced in this complex world alone. Everything is in the context of interactions with all of these differences, and that happens in the space between. But we're not looking at that organizationally. We're measuring all the pieces, all the parts, and the outputs, and all, and maybe our big metrics, but we are not measuring the between. And again, I'll just say, why is the between so the most important part? Is because the relation, that is the between, is what's producing everything in any organization. And this is the success driver I referenced at the start when we were just getting going, that organizations, they're not thinking about. And because they might be thinking about it in terms of teamwork and that sort of thing, but they're not seeing the space. They don't have a lens through which to actually see the space and what's happening, how to quantify it, how to know what to do about it. And that's my work. I mean, that's what I write about in You and We. That's what we do, me and my colleagues at Withy Leadership, is we do these 3 things essentially at scale. We make the between visible. and we make it measurable, and we make it actionable. And that's something that's a tool set that leaders and organizations they are not currently taking advantage of because they don't have the lens to even see the issues. So I want to dive into that with you, and I want to give you just a quick example first of all. So one of our just a current one of our current projects we're working on is the merger of two major companies in the world. Okay. So you think of an M&A situation and you think about, the risks associated, and you can go through an analysis of all the things you have to get right. But when you think relationally, and by the way, these two companies are actually headquartered in different continents. So you have cultural divides and differences. They historically had been, real big time competitors. So you have all of that. So when you think relationally, what you come to realize is, holy smokes, the success of this merger and the success of the combined venture is going to depend not only on the combined assets of those organizations, but how those combined assets are actually able to merge and converge together in relation and productively work together. That's actually more than anything else what you need to be looking at and paying attention to and improving. And the leaders here of the acquiring side of the organization, they knew that well. They reached out to us and thought this is the key driver for the success of this whole deal, is we have to get that connection right across the system. Now, that word, so I want to dive into, we have a number of ways and tools and technologies to illuminate the space between us, this relational space. And I'm going to introduce one of those to you tonight. Or, well, it's my night. I guess it's not your night. It's your morning, I think. Um, and to do that, I want to actually give you another word from relation here for a moment. Because relation can be confusing in this regard, because when I say the word relation, I actually mean something different than relationship. And sometimes we can get confused on those two things. When I say relation, I'm just talking about the state of reality. Everything is in relation. It's inescapable. You can't get out of that reality even if you tried. With everything you had, it's impossible. We're relational beings. Now, within that relational being, we can work on building certain relationships with other people. That's we can also do. So relation is just reality, and relationship is by choice. Okay. Now I'm going to give you another word that we use in organizational space that we find at Withy. We find this to be a really helpful word for people, and it's the word connectivity. That performance improves by orders of magnitude as our levels of connectivity increase. The silos break down, come down, we get more integrated. It's a word you'll often hear like in sporting environments, team sporting environments in particular. Coaches will describing their success in a match, they'll say we had great connectivity tonight, or if they lost, we were not connected tonight. That's the kind of language you'll hear. And connectivity is something you can see in any social activity that's physical. You can see it, okay? You can't see it so easily, though, in any social activity that's primarily mental. And that's the core of the issue when you're tackling connectivity and trying to quantify risk around connectivity or lack thereof in organizational space, where much of our work is mental. So I'm going to show you a physical. This is going to be a 10-second clip I just pulled from YouTube. I don't know if you can hear this sound or not. Whether you can hear it or not, it's actually not important. But this is a little clip from what you might think of it as a firefighter Olympics. So you have these different firefighter teams competing against each other in various competitions. And this particular competition, the project is to get as much water as you can out of that bin you see there on the slide, up a ladder to another bin on the top of a platform in the allotted time. So I'm going to run this. It's about 10 seconds. Just watch this and watch it for connectivity. Watch for how you can actually see it. Okay, here we go. Okay, can you see that? By the way, could you hear the sound or not? Was there sound on that you could hear or no? No sound? Okay. Yeah, but you can see it, right? You can see the connectivity between them, how they're working really as one. So as I said, in a physical system, physical activity that's social, you can see connectivity. But what do you do in scenarios like organizational life where you actually can't see it because so much of it is mental? Well, I want to give you what we call the 5 levels of connectivity. And once you have these, you're going to see how you can start to quantify the space between. And we'll do this together. So these levels of connectivity, we express them mathematically. And the higher you go connectivity, just like the mathematics works in your favor, the connectivity works dramatically in your favor the higher you climb on this ladder. So the lowest rung of connectivity we call division. So at the division level, we're obstructing each other. We're making things more difficult for each other. Next level up, we call subtraction. And at the subtraction level, we're resisting each other. Okay. So we're not obstructing, but we might be ignoring each other, for example. That would be a symptom of a subtraction level relation or connectivity. We might be avoiding each other, doing workarounds in the system so we don't have to deal with each other. These are all manifestations of subtraction. Next level up we call addition. And at the addition level, we're neither obstructing nor resisting anymore, but we're coexisting, which is to say we're all working maybe really hard and maybe at really high levels of competency, but our heads are down, sort of focusing either individually or within my own team. We're focusing on our own things. Other people are doing their things. We're not really paying attention so much. We're really focusing on our own lane. And that's that we call that addition. Sort of a very siloed way of working, very common across organizations. Next level up, we call multiplication. Now we're collaborating across our functional divides. And then the highest level we call compounding, where there's this deep integration. The separations that are characteristic of the lower 4 levels are melting away, and we deeply integrate our activities and our efforts, and we're all united around what we're hustling after together, et cetera. Now, just a couple, just to add to the math here, by analogy, let's think about a team of 5 people. So, and let's say each of us we show up to work, we bring an output of 1 on our own. That's our capacity. We bring 1. So I show up to work and I bring 1. Okay. So if there's a team of 5 and we're operating at the division level, and that means we're getting in the way of each other, at least to some degree, or this could be between different teams also at this level, our output is going to be something less than 5 because we're getting in the way somehow of the 1 that we each are bringing. Same thing at the subtraction level, our output's less than 5. At addition, we each bring our 1 and it adds up to 5. We get an output of 5. That's a big, that's an advance. Huge advance starts to kick in when you get toward multiplication, because now we're at 5 times 5, so we're getting an output of 25, again by analogy. But things get really exciting when you get up toward compounding, because now you're getting into sort of a 5 to the 5th power operation, and you get a crazy number. Again, this is just a mathematical analogy, but it is a bit like the Richter scale as you move up these different levels of connectivity. In fact, the way we number them, we start division at -2, subtractions -1, addition is a 0, multiplication is a 1, and compounding is a 2. But again, each jump of the ladder is sort of a Richter scale level sort of advance over the prior levels. Now, you can think about, let's take a kind of a very everyday activity, and let's think about them in terms of these 5 levels of relation for a moment. In fact, this isn't even a workplace activity, but it's a good analogy for a workplace activity. So here's our activity: preparing a meal. Okay. So if we're preparing a meal at the division level, what kinds of things happen? Well, we might be really disagreeing about what we want to eat, or how it should be prepared, or who should be going to the store, or who shouldn't be going to the store. We might be trying to denigrate the other person's idea, and no, it's got to be ours. I mean, all of that stuff. When we get at the subtraction level, maybe we're not really listening to the others who might be involved in preparing this meal. I don't really care what they think. I mean, I think I have the better idea. So we're kind of working around each other and kind of doing meal, but we're going to end up with something that's probably a bit wonky because we're also resisting each other while we're doing it. At the addition level, we might be eating alone, might have made our own meals. I'm going to eat my stuff, you'll eat your stuff. which is fine, as happy as it goes, but we're totally duplicating efforts and not getting the return we could, and the leverage we could out of that. And then, of course, when we get to multiplication, that's different. I mean, now we're working together. Maybe one of us goes to the store while someone else is doing the prep. We're working together on those things. But when you get compounding, you're doing that. But we might even be discovering new recipes. Now we're like, what is actually possible from what we have here, even beyond what we've thought before? What kinds of innovations are there that are possible for us? So whether it's preparing a meal, you can think about any business situation. We're working with another client right now on giving and receiving feedback. You just think about feedback at each of the levels, and it's entirely different at each of the levels of connectivity. Same thing for how you're going to tackle any business challenge. Now, let's come back to relational risk for a moment, because you can see you suffer from higher levels of relational risk across the system the lower we are on this chart. It just profoundly increased the levels of risk. And I'm going to show you that here sort of in organizational space here in just a moment. But I want to make sure that that we don't miss this. The levels of relation aren't about good people and bad people. We all intersect at these different levels of relation at different times in different places. But what they are about is what kind of world gets created between us when we interact, because the kinds of worlds we create, the kinds of possibilities that we create are very different at each of these levels, which is why relational risk is such a real thing, because we're unable to create many of the possibilities at the lower levels that we could at the higher levels. So now with that, I want to get into and show you a little relational mapping, and we're going to do this quickly. I'm going to we'll do this. We might let's not. There's a little tool. If you want, you can just shoot this with your phone. I'll walk through this quickly. This is just going to be a very personal, you only mapping experience. If you want to do that, take out your phone and do that. It's still the same QR code here. If you get to this screen, I would just say log in as a guest. That way you don't have to register. You don't have to put any information in. Just log in as a guest. And then once you've done that, just click on create a new map. And here you can call your map whatever you want to call it. And then in the map name. And then in category, there's friends, work, or other. Just click which category is, are you going to think of a workplace group of people? Are you going to think of a personal life group of people? Some mix, you choose, it's all up to you. And then click create and continue. And then when you do that, you just type a person's name and then click add. Type the next person's name, click add. The next person's name, click add. And you do that with at least 3. If you just want to test this just for 3 people, put 3 names in. You can put more in if you'd like. But once you've done that, then you click on proceed to scoring. And when you proceed to scoring, you'll see this grid. Depending on the size of your phone screen, you might have to screen over to see the farthest column on the right. But you just touch which level of relation, say over the last 3 months, would you say characterizes this relationship between you and this other person. And this, by the way, is really important. This is not a score about them, and it's not a score about you. It's a score about the space between you. It's your we score, if you will. And you're in this score as much as they are. Where would you rate it? And so you do that, and then you click finish and see your results. And when you do that, it'll just give you the scores you gave for each of those relationships, give you a little bit of information about each of those. And that will give you then a connectivity score. This is, just over these relationships that you did, this is the average. And this, of course, is just your perspective. Now, if you wanted to get others' perspective, there's a way here you'd click and you'd have to enter in their emails, and they'd get some information, and then they could rate the relationships back, and then you would get a second column. The way we utilize this in organizational space is we create what are called connectivity maps. So we would load in, say, a team, for example, or the whole enterprise, the departments of the organization. That would already be loaded. And then you'd have people go in, and it could be, if you're at the executive team, the executive team could each sort of be rating the levels of connectivity between each of the parts of the department. Or Or you could, everyone in each department could be, and you'll see how quick it is. It's like, takes about a minute. They can enter their views of the connectivity scores between their department and each of the others. And it kicks out what we call a connectivity map. And I want to show you that. So here's a client we were just working with last week on this. So this is their current connectivity map. This is at their enterprise level. So these are the departments. You can also do this between team members. So you see there's 1, -2, you got some -1s, you've got a bunch of zeros and a fair number of ones, and then a couple of +2s. Now you can look at this. So their overall connectivity score for right from their perspectives here for the organization is a 0.29. So it's a barely over addition, which means you're getting a little bit of lift from the social system, but not a lot yet. You're still just barely over addition. And you can start to see relational risk here, not just in the negative numbers either. Look at the marketing line. Look at marketing, second from the bottom. That's their row, and go over to sales. So marketing rated their current level of connectivity with sales is at 0, which means they're coexisting. Same thing for sales. Go down the next row, sales to marketing, the second to last column, 0. Both marketing and sales rated their current level of connectivity with the other department at 0. Now, there's huge relational risk in that 0. I mean, that marketing and sales are not more tightly integrated than that in this organization. Certainly that's the case in the negatives as well, but you can start to analyze relational risk. One of the things we do, and we did this last week with this company, we said, okay, over the next 3 months, what would the ideal connectivity levels be for this organization? And their map of that was this. The next 3 months, really, to meet our strategic goals, these are what the connective nodes should look like if we're really going to nail our objectives. And their overall connectivity score goes from 0.29 to 1.36. Now, once you have this, what you're looking at is you're looking at a map of the white space on your org chart. All that, the between that we say is the most important part that you've never had a view of, here you go. Here's one way you get a view. You're seeing the space in the organization. And now you can get purposeful. You can iterate this. We usually iterate these on a quarterly basis across a system. And you can see where we're at currently, where ideally, given our strategy. And you'll notice, strategically speaking, maybe you don't need 2s in all the nodes. I mean, this organization, there's a number of those, strategically speaking. 0 is fine because these parts of the organization don't really touch each other much. Other places, multiplication gets us there. Other places is essential. We go to compounding. But those are discussions you can have once you've got the lens through which to actually see the space. And that also allows you to see the risks that we haven't been seeing and plan against them. Now, with all that said, I want to give you one more piece, since this is top of mind for everyone, and then we'll come back to questions and we can take on whatever issues you have. I want to think about relation now in the context of the age of AI. Okay, so let's think about human work here for a moment. If you think about all of human history, for almost all of human history, human beings made their livings through physical labor, through their bodies. Stronger people, faster people, had more physical abilities, more highly valued. We were valued for our physical abilities. This is true for almost the entirety of human history until the last 150 years or so. And I'm going to call that the body economy, that humanity existed within a body economy for most of our history. That started to change with the Industrial Revolution in its various waves as machines started to become better at a lot of the physical stuff that we used to be doing with our own bodies. And so there was a disruption of the body economy. It opened a space. Well, what are human beings going to do now? And being smarter became increasingly more valued than being stronger. And the focus of human work moved away from the body for most of us to the brain and the mind. And that's where most of us have been making our livings, is in the brain space. I'm going to call that the brain economy. And what's happening with AI is we're now in the middle of this massive disruption that mirrors the previous disruption of the body economy, because machines are getting comparatively better than human beings are at a lot of the brain activities as well. So we're getting more and more moved out of the brain space. And the question is, what does that mean for our work? Now, here's a quote from the former president of the London School of Economics. She said, in the past, jobs were about muscles. That was the brain economy. Now they're about brains. That was the brain economy. But we're transitioning. But in the future, they'll be about the heart. And by heart, I submit to you what that means is that's an acknowledgement that what's unique about human beings is our ability to be in relation at depth. Machines have these incredible surfaces. They have all the data can load it, and they can pull up the data like this. There's not a depth beneath that. It's just massive amounts of data. But human beings have this unique ability to be in relation. And it's our comparative advantage. Relative to machines and technology, if all we do is we have body abilities or brain abilities, more and more we get moved out of those spaces because machines are overtaking much, if not most of that space. Being really adept at the relational aspect of, across a social system is massively, it's the big thing that human beings can bring that machines can't. And if we're not paying attention to that, we're ignoring a huge part of risk across the system relative to human work. Here's a quote. I'll leave you with two quotes. This is a quote from another author named Keith Ferrell. He said, the defining characteristic of the new work is radical interdependence. Top-down management still sets the budgets, but the work itself is getting done through sprawling networks of radically interdependent relationships and cross-functional teams. Relational networks have evolved into the primary medium for getting work done. You can just inventory your own work experience to see if that isn't more and more the case for you as well. And then finally, here's a quote from me in You and We. I wrote this in the preface. I say this: management of the individual is dead, or soon will be. Management of relation is the new leadership paradigm. Okay? Because we exist in a relational reality. An organization is nothing but it's a relational matrix. And the more we can raise the values of the relational field across a system, the more that lifts everything that's going on across the system. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I will stop sharing the screen so we can just come back here. Yeah. Okay, Brad. So we can
great,
take
Jim.
on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A few questions. A bit of time for a few questions, my friend. Look,
sure.
First of all, thank you, Jim. That's outstanding, my friend. You covered such rich and deep territory so quickly.
Yeah, that was a lot in a short period of time. Yeah.
Very great, and it's a culmination of a lifetime of both research and writing and practice, my friend. So really deeply appreciate your contribution here today. Look, there's a few good questions. They're all good questions, but here's one I'm going to take from the chat from Kumara. How do we maintain healthy professional relationships at work without becoming so close that I get hurt when others don't take ownership or contribute toward our shared goals? It's a really interesting one.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, first of all, look, there's no, when we're talking about relationality and connectivity, there's no moral judgment here. I mean, we can intersect at any of these planes, and there are times that are maybe appropriate at any of them. You take a competitive sporting environment, the rules of the game are set up to pit teams against each other in the negative territories of relation, right? I mean, that's the way that those structures are even set up. Within an organization, it's hard to find a place where the negative would be helpful. But wow, you can multiply a lot. You can collaborate a lot without actually necessarily going deep into any personal matters. And even when you get up to compounding doesn't mean you have to be bearing your soul personally. It means that we're getting united around common goals, common mission. We're getting creative about our work together. We're thinking about our impact on each other. We're sort of bringing our work together. You can do all of that without sort of getting real personal with people and sort of personal. That's your own choice, whether we do that or not. Now, look, outside of the work, of course, we're always living in the middle of that choice. And in my experience, will tend to sort of break open and open up more to people that we trust, right? And
Yeah.
and so the more trust that you can build in a relationship, the more people actually are willing to go beyond the surface and go down to depth, which is one of the reasons why, in fact, I'd say it's the primary reason in organizational space why trust is so critical, is because it allows exactly that. We can get beyond just the surface and we can truly begin to make water.
I think that's beautifully put, Jim, and I'm going to encourage Kamara and those attending today with just a little lesson you taught me many years ago. So did many other colleagues of mine. But Jim, you taught that I need to shift my thinking, my mindset, and away from judgment of others towards curiosity in others. And I think if you can start making less statements and start asking more questions in those moments in that workplace or in your private relation, there's a strong chance that you'll move up that ladder, to
Agreed.
use the expression. Yeah. So thank you very much for that, and thank you, Kamara, for asking a great question. I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to hand over to Pete Cully. Pete, you've got a question for Jim?
Oh, Jim and Brad, thank you so much as well for everything you've been talking about today. I mean, I see how relational risks directly affect execution, engagement, innovation, organizations' ability to adapt in transformation, which we're seeing so much in the market today. And, explain why well-designed strategies, et cetera, high-performing teams suddenly fail. So this is a great additional perspective, and how focusing on this area can improve those working relationships, lead to better results, etc. But it's a question that Luke Krieger actually raised a bit earlier on, which I'd like to bring forward, which is, what is the saturation point of connectivity? What is the number of people that we have to actually get across what is the saturation point of the number of people we interact with to be able to actually get something meaningful? Because there's got to be a point where you can't keep going.
So that's a great question. So Luke, first of all, I would say this is where I want to make the distinction between relation and relationship again. We're all in relation, even with people that are many sort of degrees separated from us, where everything's embedded relationally. That's just inescapable. And it's not that we have to put time to things in order for them to be in relation. We're already in relation. Now, the number of relationships that a person can truly have of different levels, of course, is time-bound and effort-bound. And there's an interesting body of work, for example, around what are called the Dunbar number and Dunbar circles. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the Dunbar number comes out of actually brain research above all things. But the Dunbar number is 150, which is in organizational space. When you break across 150, you have to have different kinds of structures to be able to handle that. But the Dunbar circles sort of go out in sort of multiples of 3, starting at like 1.5 up to 3, and it climbs up. And these are all about like your closest relationships, your really good friends, your acquaintances, and there are people in each of those rings. And I think it's helpful to sort of see who's in those rings. Who am I spending my time with? Like in the workplace, am I only spending time and attention with people on my own team? Are my Dunbar circles sort of filled up with people who are just sort of in my own function, for example? If so, we're not getting any cross-functional lift. We're not getting the touch points across the divides of the organization. And so you want to be strategic and purposeful about that. And this is true. Your point, Luke, is not only true at the individual level, it's true at the team level. So teams too, are in interaction with other teams, or departments are interaction with other departments. Now, of course, they're in interaction through their various processes and systems that bring them in touch, but also through the individuals that's this team's representative that's interfacing with a representative from another team. So groups interact partly through the interactions of the individuals that are that are members of those various teams. So as team leads, it's really important, in my experience, to be thinking about what are the other teams and groups we actually need to be in connection with. And this is one of the things that we've learned since COVID is, the world adjusted really quickly to Zoom and Teams and other platforms where we got together a lot still, even when we were locked down at home with our own teams. But the interactions outside our teams fell off the cliff because those structures and systems and that was not in place. The expectation wasn't in place. And the more remote groups are, the more purposeful you need to be when you're thinking about what's our current connectivity levels via the map, for example, that we produce with companies, and versus our ideal. And then you map as a team, if this is our ideal over the next time period, how do we get there? And there's all kinds of things you can do to sort of climb that ladder. But those are all strategic choices with trade-offs, right? I mean, you have to weigh what are the strategically most important nodes that we've got to get to. This is true in my own personal life. It's true organizationally across the system with teams. And you have to make those choices, recognizing the very limitations you're pointing to. But it's so easy. One of the things that human beings we do, if left to our own devices, the word for this is homophily, but homophily means we tend to gather with people just like ourselves. So, within organizations, we'll gather with our own teams, we'll gather with our people who, if I'm an engineer, I'll gather with the engineers. If I'm a marketing person, I gather with the marketers. We gather with people like ourselves. And you have to be purposeful and full of intention to break out of that. And strategically, the results of the organization so ride on the ability to do that, to have a lens through which to see where we're currently at, where we're connecting, where we're not, deciding together what are the most important connection points, and then building the plan on how we're going to get there is just a huge thing that by and large is not happening across organizations, which is why our research shows that on average, organizations come in at 0.34 on average. So across industries, if 0 is addition and 1 is multiplication, on average, organizations are coming in at 0.34, which is about a third of the way. I mean, everyone gets, if all we're doing is addition, I mean, why even be a company? That's basically, we're not getting any relational lift. So you're trying to get toward collaboration and helping each other achieve more than anyone could do on their own. That's the push toward multiplication. But we're actually woefully poor at that on average across the world at 0.34. And the biggest reason for that, in my experience, in my opinion, is people don't know how to see the space. They don't even know how to evaluate it, much less build a plan on what you're going to do about it. So that's the big hole that we've just, we've gone right after it with the leadership, is to fill that hole in what's really crucial, but actually isn't being tackled yet, at least not very well.
Brilliantly covered, Jim. Thank you. We've only got a few minutes left. Is there another question? I've got another one here. One last one that I can see from Lee. Lee is saying, what are the pragmatic implications of the hard economy? Namely, what might jobs of the future look like, Jim?
Yeah. I mean, that's a question that the whole world's wrestling with right now. Isn't it? And, it's interesting when you look industry by industry. Now we're in the early days still of how this is going to sort out. But let's think of healthcare for a moment. So it turns out that the places where people are being replaced most quickly in healthcare are actually at the sort of doctor level, sort of at the nursing level. They're not being replaced because this is highly, it's being cared for. It's so deeply relational. But you would have thought it would have gone the other way. We can get rid of the nurses. We got to keep the docs. But it turns out that AI is cutting the other direction. It's cutting down from the top and it's cutting out the docs, because so much of the doctor space is head space, and more even surgeries are being performed. And now, physicians in conjunction with technology. But in the future, you could have technology running that show, in the OR. So that's just an example. But what I find, within any organization, you have this need right now. We all have to get conversant with technology because it's increased, and whatever your role is, we have to figure out how we interface with the tech. But the higher you go in responsibility in an organization, it's already the case that more and more of your time is spent on relational matters. When you're first hired, you're doing the tactical job, you're doing that, whether it's physical or whether it's with your brain. The higher and higher you climb in a structure, your work is more and more relational already. And I think that AI one of the things it's going to do is it's going to underscore just how valuable the human element is. We are normally thinking of the other side of it. We're getting displaced. Yeah, but relation's not being displaced. Relation's what we respond
Absolutely.
to. We're relational beings at our core. And so if we don't get good at relation, we will be displaced because machines will get better at the brain stuff. So we have to bring our mind abilities, but marry them with really, really, I'm going to say robust human abilities, relational abilities to retain value across across any work system. I think that's one of the things we're going to learn.
I think you're absolutely spot on, Jim, and it's top of the hour here now, so I think we're going to pull the recording, and we want to thank everybody who's been with us today. There's some questions in the chat, my friend. We could be here for another week easily, but we've only got the hour. So Jim Ferrell from Withy Leadership Centre in the United States. Jim, I want to thank you very, very much for your insights, your wisdom and your practical suggestions and engagement with us today. Just going to hand over to Pete. Did you want to say anything, Pete, at the end?
Yeah, Brad, thank you very much. Well, really, thank you, Jim and Brad, for helping us to explore how to measure relational risk and the space between people and how that can strengthen the way organizations work and lead.